Math 100, Lesson 11.1. We're going to talk about the square root property and the distance and midpoint formulas. Now, if you're thinking, oh no, I've messed up, I was on Chapter 10. Chapter 11, Section 1 and Section 2 are on the same exam that Chapter 10 is on, so you're in the right place. Okay, so let's start with our little square root property. If we have a variable squared is equal to some number, a is just some number, then x, that is not how you spell then, I'm so sorry. Then x is equal to plus or minus the square root of that number. So that means there's actually two answers. There's x equals the positive square root of a and x equals the negative square root of a. So there's two answers to that problem. So our directions are going to be specific in my math lab. They're going to say solve using the square root property. When you get ready to take a test, it's going to say solve using the square root property. We are going to have other methods to solve, but if it says use the square root property, then that's what I'm going to be looking for. All right, so we're going to do a few that say solve using the square root property. Remember, I just said there are other ways we could solve it, but I want us to use the square root property. So, in order to use the square root property, we've got to get x squared alone. All right, so in this number 1 right here, I need to divide both sides by 4. And I get x squared is 7. So now I can use that property up above that says, okay, well, if I take the square root of x squared, I get x. But if I take the square root of 7, my answer is plus or minus the square root of 7. So I get two completely different answers. Plus the square root of 7 and negative the square root of 7. Okay, again, if we're going to use the square root property, I need to get the x squared alone. So first I'm going to move the 11. Okay, it's almost alone. Now I'll divide by 3. And we all love fractions so much. All right, so this is where we are. Now we're going to take the square root of both sides. All right, so that leaves me with x on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, I get plus or minus the square root of 11 over 3. Now, earlier in this chapter, in chapter 10 actually, we learned that really that says the square root of 11 divided by the square root of 3, and that is like, you cannot do that. You cannot leave a radical in the denominator. So if you were to try to type this in your answer little box for my math lab, it would tell you that you are wrong, because we must rationalize. We went through a whole lesson of that. Okay, so let's rationalize here. Still have my little plus or minus. So we're going to multiply the numerator and the denominator by the square root of 3. So that leaves me with x is plus or minus the square root of 33 over the square root of 9. Now I can do the square root of 9, the square root of 33 over 3. Remember, the goal of rationalizing is getting the radical out of the denominator. So this would be the correct answer that you type into my math lab. So let's say we don't just have an x squared, we have an x minus 3 squared. Well, our process is the same. Think of it as some stuff being squared. Okay, as long as that stuff is all by itself, we're good. So I am going to take the square root of both sides. That leaves me with x minus 3 on the left, and it leaves me with plus or minus the square root of 10. I do not want a decimal. So now to solve for x, I add 3 to both sides. I like to stick that 3 in front of my plus or minus the square root of 10. So if you wanted to see what are those two answers, they are x equals 3 plus the square root of 10 and x equals 3 minus the square root of 10. That's what plus or minus means. There is that plus or minus tab in your My Math Lab toolbar, so you will be able to use that. Okay, so that's the square root property. Let's go on to the distance and the midpoint formulas. Now, both of these formulas require us to have a set of ordered pairs. So here are our two ordered pairs. Now, my little subscript 1 and 2 just mean the first ordered pair and the second ordered pair. That's all that means. Let's first talk about the distance formula. Chances are you've seen this before, the distance formula. Now here's what I need you to pay attention to when you're doing this. Notice in my distance formula, I have x2 minus x1, and then I have y2 minus y1. They must go in the correct order. Now, somebody else may say, well, I didn't call that ordered pair x2 because they were just numbers and I had to label them. We have to be consistent, okay? And here's what I mean by that. If I gave you two ordered pairs, let's say that our ordered pairs are -1, -3, and 2, 3. And I said, find the distance between the points. Find the distance between the points. So we are going to use that little distance formula. Okay, now notice we don't see x1, y1 labeled because you were given two ordered pairs. So if I were you, the first thing that I would do would be label my ordered pairs. I'm going to let this be x1 and y1. The ones go together. This is going to be x2 and y2. Now put them in the formula where they belong. The distance is x2 is 2 minus x1. So minus -1 squared plus y2 is 3 minus y1 is -3 squared. Once we have them plugged in where they belong, we just do the arithmetic. So I do need to see you do the arithmetic on your paper. Minus a negative means plus, so I'm going to go ahead and take care of that. Okay, now 3 squared is 9, 6 squared is 36. So I end up with the square root of 45. Now, My Math Lab is going to ask you to simplify that radical, and I don't believe it wants a decimal. Okay, it only wants a decimal if it tells you that you can round. All right, so let's simplify our radical here. We worked on that in chapter 10. Find a number I can take the square root of that will go into 45. I can take the square root of 9. It is 3, and the 5 stays inside. So I end up with 3 on the square root of 5. The distance formula. All right, now let's do an example using the midpoint formula. So we still got that ordered, those 2 ordered pairs. The midpoint formula says, let's take the 2 x values, add them, divide by 2. Let's take the 2 y values, add them, divide by 2. Our answer is an ordered pair. That's why there's a comma in the middle, and that's why there's parentheses on the outside, because we'll get an ordered pair for our answer. So if I gave you these 2 ordered pairs, and I said, find the midpoint. That would literally mean the point in the middle. Again, the first thing I want to do is probably label my ordered pairs. x1, y1, x2, y2. Now all I have to do is plug them in where they belong in the formula. All right, my x1 is 1, my x2 is 7, my y1 is 2, my y2 is -3. Now I want to keep those parentheses and that comma because my solution is an ordered pair. Okay, do the arithmetic. 1 plus 7 is 8. 2 plus -3 is -1. Now I can actually simplify. 8 divided by 2 is 4. And then I want to leave this as a half. So the midpoint is the ordered pair for -1/2. So literally just plugging it into the formula where it belongs and making sure you can do the arithmetic. And that is it for section 1 of chapter 11. Please let me know if you've got any questions.